knew that it wasn't going to be easy for me. I also hadn't signed my contract extension yet, so that was still up in the air. And so I'm explaining all of this stuff to him, like I'm gonna stand, but we have to be ready for this. And the thing that he said to me is that you cannot stand for God and God not stand for you. And from that was the moment that we're like, okay, we're gonna do this. And I stood the next day.
First of all, I want to learn a little bit more about your life story. You've talked about how taking a stand throughout your life has really been a continual process. What does that process look like?
So the process looks like where I started. And so when I grew up in Bronx, New York, I left Bronx, New York when I was about 10 years old and moved to Naples, Florida. My mom and my dad split up, and me, my 4 brothers and 1 sister ended up in Naples, Florida. So I went from a predominantly Black community to a predominantly white community, and I really, really struggled with fitting in. And I took to a nickname early on. It was Ethiopia, because I was so tall and skinny and dark, of course. I really, really struggled with fitting in. And I had a couple moments that I lay out in the book where it really does show you how terrible I was at fitting in. And I developed a real sense of anxiety, fear, self-insecurity about making friends and about receiving love, and this fear of being rejected by my peers. And so that's where the process started for me, always working for love. And then I found basketball, and basketball started to mask a lot of those feelings that I was having, because the better at basketball that I got, the more praise and attention that I got from people. So the girls started to like me, the guys started to want me on their team because I was becoming this great basketball player, but I was still struggling behind the scenes with anxiety because I didn't want to lose anything that I had gained. And so that looks like becoming the #1 player in the state of Florida, attending Florida State University, and still having to take anxiety medication to practice and to play. And so that's where I started. I would have, frequent panic attacks before games, in class, and nobody knew about this. My family didn't know, teammates didn't know. Just the coach and one of my teammates that was my roommate knew about it. And so it was something that I really hid for a long time, that I was struggling with. But I'm thankful to God that He brought the right people into my life. So that's where I started. And the process of having a relationship with Christ, it really is a really dope story that I lay out in the book, but I'll give you the little snapshot story.
Please.
I get to Orlando, I get drafted, and mind you, I grew up in church. I grew up in church. I was in church all the time. But the bigger and bigger basketball got for me, the more and more it took over everything in my life. And I really had a picture of what I felt like a man was. And it wasn't one going to church. It was, going out, lots of money, cars, all those different things. And so when I got drafted, I wanted to experience it all. But it wasn't before long that I started to notice that it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. And one day a teammate invites me to chapel. And the chaplain says, I'm going to start with a verse and then we're going to talk about it. And the verse that he led with was Luke 6:46. And that verse says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say?" And the verse hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. I would pray when times got tough. I would change my music when I wasn't playing well, but it wasn't something that I stuck with, or I didn't really care what Jesus had to say about my life. And I decided in that time that I was going to find out if Christianity was real. And so I started binging Christian apologetics, Frank Turek, John Lennox, William Lane Craig, staying up late at night watching these videos. And during that time, one day I was getting onto an elevator, and a gentleman was also waiting to get onto the elevator. And he stops me and he says, "I can tell you how to be great." Now, this is still during my rookie season. And I said, "How? Tell me." He said, "You have to know Jesus." And I said, "Man, I know Jesus. What the heck?" And then kept it moving. But then I kept seeing the guy over and over again, all over the place. I would see him in the parking lot. I would see him at the elevator. I would see him in front of the building. And he would always ask me to go to lunch with him. And I saw him so many times that I was like, look, if I see you one more time, I will go to lunch with you. Lo and behold, I see him the next day. We go to lunch. The lunch is fine, but it wasn't anything special. So I leave the lunch. I delete his number. I don't see him for a while. And this is where it really gets interesting. I go to the movie theaters with a friend of mine one night, and we go to watch a Christian film. But the movie is so terrible, Kirk. It's so cheesy. It wasn't one of your movies, I promise. It wasn't one of your movies. And we switched to Thor, and we're watching Thor, and the movie's over with. And we leave in the movie theater, and he says to me, "Where are you at with God?" And I'm like, "Man, I'm searching. I'm watching videos. I'm reading books. I'm reading my Bible, but I'm not sure." And he says to me, "If you keep looking, you're going to find." And so that night, I'm pulling out of the movie theater onto a street, and there's another car pulling onto the same street as me. And so our cars are kind of, my driver's side window is on his driver's side window. And I roll down the window and he rolls down the window, and it's the guy from the elevator. And this is late at night that I get to see him. And so I said to myself, God wants this guy in my life. And so I say to him, you know what? Me and you, we're going to go to breakfast tomorrow morning. We go to breakfast. Thanksgiving is coming up, and I tell him all about my plan to feed the homeless with burgers. And he says to me, you can't do that. And I said, why? He said, if you're going to feed people, you have to feed people right. And sorry, this is a long-winded story, but I want you to get it
No,
out.
it's great.
And so so he says, you can't do that. He says, it turns out that the guy has a catering company that feeds prisons. And he says to me, if you buy the food, I'll cook it and we can really, put something on for the homeless. And so I'm following him to Sam's Club and I'm saying inside of myself, what are you doing? You don't even know who this guy is. But I said to myself, something about this feels right. And so I go to Sam's Club. I buy the food. Some people come and take it. And the next Saturday, I get a text with an address. I go to the address and there's a line of 200 homeless people waiting to be fed. I jump in line. I put my hairnet on. There's a young lady standing next to me who's also serving food. That young lady goes on to become my wife today. But but so we pass out the food. We feed the homeless. Right? It gets even better. We pass out the food. We feed the homeless. And I was injured at the time. I hurt my ankle during the game, and his name was Doc, the guy from the elevator. He pulls me inside of what seemed like a church, and he said, "Could I pray over your ankle?" And I said, "Sure." So he goes down, he prays, and I got home that night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was looking out for me, like my footsteps were being ordered, and that somebody loved me. And it was so heartfelt for me because I was so used to working for love. Basketball, being the class clown, always trying to gain the acceptance and the love of people around me. But here I was, this guy that I wasn't even checking for, that I was trying to live my own life to do. I felt like he cared about me. And I started crying and I kneeled down on my bedside for the first time that I had done at all at being in Orlando. And I remembered my youth group prayer from when I was going to youth group as a kid. Jesus, be Lord of my life, come into my heart. And then from then on, this is the ending. Doc invites me to church. And I said to him, hey, if you're cool, your pastor has to be cool. I'll go to church with you. We go to church, they introduce the pastor, and Doc walks out onto the stage and preaches the sermon. And then from then on, he's been my pastor, Dr. Deron Hepburn of Jump Ministries Global Church here in Orlando. And I've just been growing. And that process of getting to where I am today has come through, mentorship and being in church and just continuing to grow based on the word.
Before you took your famous stand, you say that your pastor said something to you.
So on the night before I decided to stand in the bubble, I was on the phone with my pastor, Pastor Deron Hepburn, and I'm telling him how crazy that this stand is going to be. Like, he doesn't understand what it's going to be like. I knew that I was going to be called a coon and Uncle Tom and all these different things. I knew that it wasn't going to be easy for me. I also hadn't signed my contract extension yet, so that was still up in the air. And so I'm explaining all of this stuff to him, like, I'm gonna stand, but we have to be ready for this. And the thing that he said to me is that you cannot stand for God and God not stand for you. And that was the moment that we're like, okay, we're gonna do this. And I stood the next day.
Now, in your book, you also have a chapter in there entitled Growing Pains. Great title. Great title for a chapter. I know a little bit about that. What did those growing pains look like for you?
The time that I decided, you know what, I'm going to live my life for Christ, that's when the growing pains really started. And so it was about, okay, how do I balance this life of deciding to live for Christ and being an NBA basketball player who previously was living the NBA basketball player lifestyle? So with teammates, with friends, and all these different things, how do I attack that? And so I started to really just cut things off. I unfollowed people on social media, deleted numbers, and told myself that I was going to be celibate from there on out. And so I had these growing pains of working through teammate relationships and just growing in my faith. Our pastor called me to speak on a Sunday. And now you have to think about how much I struggle with anxiety. And now this man is calling me to preach on a Sunday after I had been growing in the church for a while. And the old Jonathan would have immediately said no. I actually did immediately say no. But he said to me, only give me your answer after you really pray about it. And so I prayed about it and I decided to do it. And he said to me, I think you should invite your teammates. And so now I was going to these teammates that I was just in the club with a few weeks ago. And I'm going to them saying, hey, I'm going to be preaching. You should come. And so those were the growing pains that I was working through And the more and more that I just seen myself say yes to God, in spite of my fear, in spite of my anxiety, the more and more that I grew. And I was going through the growing pains, even on the court, of struggling with that fear, struggling
Yeah.
with the anxiety, to now getting these tools to equip me to fight, speaking the word over myself before games, reciting scriptures in my head. And I saw myself get better and better.
Jonathan, you talk about how God prepared you, and you can see this process and all the growing pains that you went through. Do you think that all of that was leading you up to this nationally televised moment of you taking a stand? And if so, what does that tell you about the kind of God that you serve and how he works through you?
Well, Kirk, you're exactly right. When the stand happened, so many people came out and said Jonathan Isaac is the most courageous guy and the most bold guy. But the thing that was striking to me was knowing the process that it took for me to get there, and obviously knowing where I started, riddled with anxiety, riddled with fear. How did I become this person who would be willing to stand and stand alone, for that matter? And that's really where the book came out of. My pastor came to my house one day and said, "You know what? You're going to write a book, because people know your stand, but they don't know your story." And the story, to me, especially writing it, is really what gives the book its backbone, why I stand, why I decided to stand. And so it tells me that God obviously knows the future. He obviously knows what he's preparing us for. But even more so, the only thing that is more terrifying to the enemy than us just becoming a Christian is us becoming who God has created us to be, and growing and forming into the image of his son, and being able to do what he's called us to do. And so if I didn't have those small moments of courage that God was taking me through, fighting fear in those small ways, speaking at church, speaking to teammates, doing different things, I would never have been equipped enough to stand in that moment, knowing that I was going to be standing alone.
Hi, I'm Kirk Cameron. Thanks for watching this clip from my interview with Jonathan Isaac. Please like and comment on this video. And if you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another episode.